Okay, it's on.
Good morning, all.
Good morning. Welcome to the Radical course. Radical course.
It's going to be radical.
It's going to be radical.
But
Solita crash course on radical data transparency in the supply chains. And your experts, we today will be Topi and I, Mikko.
Now, Mikko, radical data transparency in the supply chain, that's quite a mouthful.
It is.
What in the world
What
makes us want to talk about something like that?
So you want to give in a nutshell, the whole crash course already in this
Yes,
phase?
because some of our audience, they're busy people.
Yes.
They have around 2 minutes. So
yeah.
Why do we want to speak about it today?
Why do we want to speak about it today? There's some quite selfish reasons, partly that we've been having a privilege to work on these topics with few forerunning companies, and those have been super cool projects to do, and collaboration with those customers. And partly due to those reasons, we also thought that as we've been also having the opportunity to work together, that why just to keep it to ourselves? And then we decided to host this crash course and a bit share the insights, what we've been able to capture as Solita in working at this topic.
And also, I think when we speak of supply chains, sharing is caring.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So about Solita, a couple of words. Most likely not all of you are familiar with Solita. It's great that we have a live audience also here at Helsinki, but there's like a couple of hundred people online watching us and joining us for this crash course. So we are a data company and we create value out of data in a connected world. So supply chain as a topic is quite familiar and in the core in some sense for us. I don't know, I won't go into the details. You can see the figures, how we are as a company. Maybe something worth of mentioning, the growth. I think that is quite cool to be part of, but also in terms of what kind of capabilities we have in-house due to that growth and having organic growth in terms of employees on a yearly basis. So from 1 to 6 on the right-hand side of in this slide, you can see the key competence areas of Solita where we work with our customers. And we both are coming from our design unit, but basically are spanning across all these 6 different topics depending on the assignment and the customer we are working with. But about today, it will be quite a crash course in terms of how much we try to squeeze in to this. So there are so many things on aspects to consider. So we have tried to have as many as possible for this time frame, but still in a form that it's nice to listen and participate to this.
We'll be speaking extremely fast.
Yes, we will be. So there's 3 segments in the presentations. So introduction to our topic, of course, that we can get ourselves onboarded to this topic. Then we will be spending most of the time in what's happening. We have selected a couple of industries that we take a bit of deep dives, and then actual like use cases or actual like case studies type of things that we would like to share. So it will be zooming in and zooming out all the time. We take a bigger picture, take the business environment, and then zoom into an actual like phenomenon and maybe even an insight from a particular case. And we of course close the then crash course by providing you with a couple of like summaries and maybe suggestions based on our learnings at Solita that how to address the topic and move forward. Sounds good? Worth of spending the time together.
I think it sounds excellent.
Yes. So Topi, please take us through.
Sure. So
or get us started, actually.
I'll get us started, not through. I'll get us started. So as Mikko said, we'll briefly outline from a sort of very high level, a couple of themes, and then we will be diving into it and diving out and causing a lot of nausea and vertigo, but that's quite all right. Just hang in there with us. transparent supply chains, radical transparency, a couple of themes that, as we've had exposure to a number of projects with our customer, there's some sort of overlapping themes that we run into time and time again, especially in this day and age and related to supply chains and transparency. What we see right now on the market and in terms of the operating environment is that there's a thirst for details. What that thirst means exactly, how does it embody, we'll get to it in a second. The second thing is that the companies that we work with, they clearly have an appetite to invest in this. They realize this is a theme that they need to address somehow. They're not quite always sure how, and that is the fusion menus. So trying a bit from here and there to see what will land on the plate and then trying to figure out what is that gives the best review.
And I like the term mixed menus in terms of mixed reviews also, that different industries are approaching the same, but with a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
But they are basically all the same. So most likely these will converge in quite short time. So we've also tried to bring in that kind of like couple of tasting menus from different industries to also bridge across.
Yes, and if it's a good tasting menu, then there's a chef's kiss.
True.
But yeah, so, and I think today also what you'll be seeing is sort of adjustments between high-level strategic decision details. That's also something that's very prevalent today. So when we're speaking of transparency in the supply chains, it really boils down to sometimes very minute and granular details regarding your product or regarding your operations. But at the same time, those should somehow feed into sometimes quite strategic processes and strategic decisions. So what does that mean exactly? Help us, Mikko, bring some flesh around the bones when we're speaking of the market.
Yeah. These were maybe sneak peeks and what we will be addressing and coming back along the way. So as we are talking about supply chains, it's not at all a new thing. It's been part of the operative excellence for some time for the companies, and of course will be. What do you need to make your stuff? How do you get it most effective ways? And then do your thing. Basically, create your solutions on products and then ship them to your customers. This has been a topic for companies for some time, and due to like recent hiccups in global supply chains, it has maybe raised a bit of the importance in the agendas. But in terms of transparency, only the financial part typically has been transparent outside the company. So supply chain and the performance of supply chain, your suppliers, those have been typically your internal information. And where we are seeing where this is moving, partly due to supply chain performance improvements or wishes to improve it, make it even more better. So this kind of hunger for details, the actuals on individual product level is something that it is emerging and happening in different phases in different industries. And then the transparency, as I mentioned, that previously only the financial data has been, or financial information, the transparent one from the companies publicly. Now, due to regulation and green transition, it's not just about what do you need and how do you use it. It's about actually being transparent on what are you using as a natural resources or your raw materials and how do you use it. So regulation is pushing towards that kind of transparency, and this, even though it's regulatory driven partly, it is changing the business environment where the companies are operating. And data in here comes in all shapes and sizes. Partly it exists, partly it's not existing. It's not that rare to still hear that actually in our operations people are using pen and paper to document quite operative information, which is then aggregated to annual level reports and whatnots. So how are we able to move towards having continuous data flows across the whole value chains and within your own value streams when the data is in a way looking like this as we see in the picture? That's something that we will address and show a couple of like how a couple of companies have started to work on the topic. But this is where we are today. So starting from that overview, I think we are now geared in thinking to the same topic and from a, in a way, top-down view. Let's start to make it more like concrete to our audience also. Topi, how should we do this?
When we speak of supply chains and value chains, we all play some kind of part there. In this, whether we're on the sort of raw material side, OEM and production, or usage of it. And regarding our themes and our ideas that we'll be speaking of today, I think it would be good for you, dear listener, to try to identify your place in the supply chain where you operate. It might not fully fit into this picture, but try to paint a picture of where you are in a flow of goods, flow of capital, and flow of value. One easy thing is just to think of what is it that you produce and how is that used by your customer. What do you need to get it done? First of all, take a position in this value chain. I think that will help a lot of the things we'll be speaking of today if you can place yourself heuristically on this map. And I think the second thing that is good to form some kind of baseline when we are speaking of transparency in supply chains and then different kinds of investments that companies do to that or your company is to sort of place yourself in some kind of, this is a binary decision on purpose, but some kind of sliding scale of what is it that your company is trying to achieve when we think of creating transparency in the value chains. Is it that you're trying to keep up with different kinds of external demand? That is something we call transparency. Or are you possibly investing in the future and trying to create something totally new? That is something we call radical transparency. Regarding this, I think the second thought is that when we are speaking of transparency in the value chain or radical transparency, this might be self-evident to a lot of you, but don't start, or what we recommend, what we've seen, don't start from something new. Don't try to spin up a new business line or new service. Figure out first what is it that your customer is actually buying from you. What are the key elements that influence their buying decisions? And when you think of transparency in your operations, transparency in your product or service, start from that. Start figuring out what are the basic elements that the customer is buying. What are the things that I can influence as a company with better transparency? That's a good starting point because it is something your customer understands easily. Well, this is still very theoretical, so let's try to bring a certain amount of concretion on it. So today we'll be speaking on the commodity end. We'll be speaking about something related to green premiums. Mm-hmm. On the B2B product and service side, we'll be showcasing the built environment or the construction industry. And on the B2C or forward-leaning side, we'll be speaking a little about scenario work. And hopefully these will once again give you folks something to grasp on. Exactly. As these sort of very high-flying themes are going on. But Mikko, I think it's still worthwhile to give a little bit of look at what does all of this mean today?
Yeah, maybe a quick pause here as like what are the triggers? We've been mentioning this kind of regulatory push and changing business environment. So just quickly, not going through all the topics here, but what are on quite high on the company's agendas, for example, if you are in the industry that is affected by EUDR, European Deforestation Regulation, meaning that is your raw material coming from an area of deforestation? And if yes, then basically that kind of raw materials are restricted, or your product using that kind of raw materials are blocked from the EU markets. So that is quite a big impact already, even though it's regulation, but drastically changing the business environment the companies affected are operating in. Maybe the second one, the eco-design, also EU-led initiative is introduced, how do I say, pushing towards transparency, but also hoping to enable circularity via this kind of digital product passports. So for example, electric vehicle batteries has been one of the first initiatives moving forward within that eco-design. And due to those batteries having raw materials that are scarce resources, this kind of circularity and second cycle usage, reuse is super important for those raw materials. So that is also an area which is inspiring to see how it evolves and causing lots of confusion in different companies who are just entering to the topic that what does it mean for our business needing to have digital product passports, or do I dare to say digital twins in a way of their actual individual products.
You mentioned inspiring and regulation in the same sentence.
Yeah, I'm surprising myself also. But actually, if you take a minute and start to look at what are the driving forces behind those regulations, it makes it a bit more easier to take in what they are like forcing companies to do, but it doesn't take away the needed effort and frustration for being forced to do something. So I think we've been hinting that there are quite a lot below the surface behind these topics that we are raising, and we dare to say it's quite complex, and I think that's quite given.
Yeah.
But what do we mean by this? Could you elaborate a bit?
Sure, happy to. So as Mikko said, it's most likely self-evident that these kinds of external forces create a lot of complexity into already quite a complex operating environment. And we wanted to bring you, regarding this, a concrete example, pun intended, using the construction industry or the built environment, because we believe this is an area that each of us can relate to somehow. All of us live in some kind of building and work in some kind of building. All of us have some kind of scheme on what a building or building is compromised of. And on the construction industry side, first of all, it's one of the largest industries in the world, based on GDP, has one of the largest carbon footprints related to it, and is one of the least digitized of them all. And when Mikko spoke earlier about regulation, local legislation, and other external driving forces, what we are seeing in our engagements with our clients is that this is creating quite a big and always a little bit abrupt change in the market. There's right now themes such as urbanization going on more and more in Europe that force or direct majority of new building investments into cities where there's a lack of building space, and a lack of building space combined with zoning requirements creates quite a conundrum for a lot of builders. Simultaneously, on a European level, there's different kinds of green funding instruments that fund your projects that require for those instruments to be used different kinds of LCA calculations, life cycle assessment calculations, and CO2 budgets and CO2 calculations on embodied carbon. And this might be self-evident, but this is, if something, this is a supply chain issue. If we think of a building project, a builder usually subcontracts around 95 to 97% of all work done on the project. Simultaneously, if we think of what a building is made of, the supply chain and especially the material coming from over there forms the largest CO2 impact in terms of LCA carbon. And then we have these different kinds of requirements related to the design of the building and CO2 calculations. They cause detailed planning to be done. That has to be combined with ESG calculations in the design phase, in the building phase, and in the as-built phase. And if we think of what we are seeing on the market right now and what our customers are doing and investing in this space to create transparency, this is a must. If you work in the built environment and you want to maintain or increase your share of the market. If you want to take that a step forward, then things start getting really interesting. If you develop the capability to flexibly design and calculate what buildings look like, using real-time actuals from current projects and getting your supply chain data in order, we believe that is something that will actually, you will not only get a share of the market, but you will be actually one of the parties defining the market.
Yeah, I think this is super interesting, like the acronym LCA, like it's the life cycle assessment. Yeah, double checking that I'm on the right terms. So if I understood right, in construction, already designing the building has quite a restricted CO2 budgets that are causing quite a big hassle in actually figuring out how to build that given building, depending on what kind of material selections you do.
Yeah.
And switching those different options is, as you mentioned, really laborsome.
It is. And at this point, for majority of companies, sort of toggling around with different design options using CO2, real CO2 calculations is something that not a lot of parties have achieved yet. So the CO2 calculations are done after the design is chosen. Now, when we speak of the construction industry, this is of course not only related to developers or builders. The built environment has as stakeholders and partners a lot of parties from HVAC companies to companies that bring other types of sophisticated electronics into the building and window makers and so forth. So this, in terms of a supply chain perspective, this is actually quite an all-encompassing view. And as per our experience and engagements that we've been in, we still need to say this is a very complex domain that the operators work in. A couple of ideas based on our experience, what you should engage in and the method you should engage in to start solving this actually quite a wicked problem. I won't go through all of them now because you folks, I'm sure can read very well. I think the one thing we do want to point out in this, because this is in no way built environment or construction industry specific, is on our approach, path to solution, the number one, which says engage your supply chain. When we're speaking of supply chain transparency and figuring out low friction methods of transferring data and creating fluidity and understanding in the supply chain, it starts with engagement. And this is something that is actually quite unfamiliar to majority of companies. When we're speaking of the level of engagement that is needed, engagement is not a requirement email. It is not an Excel that you send. Can you please fill this in? This is a different kind of co-working and co-development methods that will be going at the end of our presentation. We'll be touching a little bit on those. But when we speak of the built environment, what I laid out was that there's the drivers for this kind of new ways of working and new ways of transparency are somehow environment related. So there is a green premium on the market. World Economic Forum right now estimates it to be in the built environment around $1.4 trillion. There's a green premium on the market, a latent demand for new ways of working and new transparency. What, Mikko, does a green premium mean? And how do that turn into action? Go ahead, do your thing.
Yeah. Thanks for giving this briefing from the overview for construction. As the buildings will be in our built environment for some time, there is a typical nuance or flavor in construction industry that I'm really liking, and that's also something that is good source to take as examples, benchmarks, or draw inspiration from that. What do we see happening in the construction industry? In terms of sustainability, for example, the EPDs, environmental product declarations, there are some data aspects that are not that maybe good ones, but in terms of content and what companies need to define from their products, the EPDs is super interesting to look into.
Yeah. EPD is so hot right now.
Yeah, believe it or not. You might need the PhD to actually understand the EPD. Okay, but about the green premium. So at the moment, as Topi was highlighting already, we see that companies who are able to introduce low embodied carbon solutions or products to the market can capitalize on them being greener than the comparisons at the moment. So some industries, for example, steel is using these kind of terms, green products and brown products, which is, I think it's quite a good terminology to have in back of the head. This is, of course, driven by the regulatory push, and maybe at the moment we are seeing this kind of carbon tunnel vision across the industries.
Carbon tunnel vision.
Yeah, you know that you are just watching one thing, even though there's more than one.
I like it.
Yeah.
Good.
And of course, that's something where we need to start. There is solid backing why that is so. But if you are putting all your eggs to that basket related to carbon, for example, in your capabilities and data perspectives, you might be in a trouble for in some time. But at the moment, carbon is the source for green premium at the moment. So if you are able to introduce a product to the market that has near zero embodied carbon, there is opportunities for you to capitalize on it. In concrete ways, introduce a higher price compared to the brown versions of the product.
Explain to me, I'm a golden retriever. What is that green premium? How does that take shape? Who pays higher prices?
I'll try to do my best in the next breakdown. So if we break it down to the building blocks, so this is a light framework that we at Solita use when we start to break things down on a business concept or business case level. So in here you can see that we have taken a product as a perspective, and then what are the key attributes or variables within that perspective. And here you can see the product. And as I mentioned, the key building block for the green premium is that your product has near zero embodied carbon compared to the competing ones in the market. And in here you can see the orange one is the status quo, meaning that the companies who are not able to introduce this kind of products, and the forerunners in green who are the ones capitalizing on green premium. So forerunners with embodied carbon near zero, and then status quo, the other competitors high on embodied carbon. And then the other attributes, as I mentioned, the green premium itself, you can introduce higher prices compared to the competitors in the market due to having a low embodied carbon or near zero embodied carbon product. What we are hearing from working with these customers and being part of helping them to work with their customers, that how do we actually figure out the dynamics between companies and this kind of operating with near zero carbon products. The quality and performance of the product needs to be on par of the existing ones. In a way, it's obvious, but at times there is even an expectation that it needs to be better than the existing ones. That is just something to be aware of when working on this field. And as we are talking about data and radical data transparency in the supply chains, another aspect here is then the data. And the attributes here are how granular and usable your own data assets are, and how transparently you are sharing your operations or information related to your products. In here, on the green one, these forerunning companies who are now introducing products with green premium are built on quite visionary thoughts already, also on the capabilities level. They consider data as a business topic. There is no separation from business to technology or data. They are the same, because in order to introduce higher prices with your products, you need to be able to solidly prove that this actually is better. You cannot just claim it. And that is also due to your customers using your products and thus being able to lower their own CO2 footprints. They are responsible to be able to prove that for their shareholders, for their customers. So this kind of, some companies are even using audit trails as a term, that they need to be able to track it back to the almost to the raw material level, that is it actually true that this is near zero product that you are providing us with.
Mikko, golden retriever here once again. Why is transparency so low? I mean, we have the granular usable, it's over there, and transparency is so low.
Yeah. And the question mark for the forwarding companies. That is something that is actually not yet settled, that how much there needs to be that transparent. The evidence needs to be there, that is given. And that is a requirement from customers buying products with green premium. But what we've seen when working with these companies is that their customers are saying that, yeah, it's a super tempting opportunity that you are bringing to the table, the opportunity that we have all the actuals on an individual product level. But then again, they themselves don't have the capabilities to utilize that data. And it could even complicate their own operations just at the very moment that we are speaking about. Like, imagine established corporates who have been growing via acquisitions. Typically, you are also buying their back-end systems at the same time, and you are not from the day zero integrating everything between the companies. So, and it's not that rare that companies might have even 8, 10 more ERP systems to handle their supply chain and their operations. And in that scenario, if a company comes in and says, we are actually providing you product individual actuals that you can take it into your operations and start to like let your customers also know, is a nightmare.
Is it a technical issue? What's holding them back?
That's a huge question. I think that at the moment, it's a technical issue. And due to that technical issues, it becomes also like human level blocker for, it's just easier to say that let's focus on keeping the status quo and make it easy for us. But that also opens the door for servitization of data. Like, if your customers are lacking some capabilities, so that is an opportunity space for you to provide some capabilities or some ready-made benefits via servitizing your data. Not just being transparent and saying that use this what you please, but servitizing it for them. And as I've been saying that we've been working on this topic, we just wanted to give a bit of like some really spot-on phenomena that we've come across in working on this topic, that for example, in this given company, the industry doesn't yet have green products. So this company that we were working with is introducing new to the industry product. So what is the actual evidence for green? That was the question on the table, or the issue, that there's no one else doing this before us. But sure, we need to prove it. So what is the actual evidence for green with our product? So that was basically the question that we started the collaboration with. And quite quickly we then started to go to like quite operative stuff, and came across that quite often manufacturing companies, in this given company is also a manufacturer, they have quite integrated business processes between their customers and in their supply chains, but especially with their customers. So this kind of data exchange automatically is a thing already, and quite established practice already. But they are more focused on orders and shipments and this kind of letters of notice, or just like systems knowing that the goods are flowing in the supply chain, or the shipments are coming to us, or the supplier actually took our order in and are now working on it, and we know when it's coming. So those were not enabling us to even there were no means to transfer that data to the customers. So double unknown. What is the actual evidence in concrete terms? And what are the means to actually deliver those evidence to the customer? So then this is an ongoing work still. So the path to solution where we started to work on this was from a nice quote that future is already here, but it's not just evenly distributed. So we started to look across different industries that, okay, do we have some examples? This industry doesn't yet have, but is there some examples? So I already mentioned the battery passport as a one inspiring example. That was something that gave us a bit of structure and some outlines that, okay, with EV batteries, they are doing it this way, and this is the actual content of data that they plan to deliver and get flowing across the value chains. So maybe there's something that we could do as a like structure, or at least as an inspiration. So that's definitely, if you are into this topic, or you feel that digital product passports are your thing, or coming thing to your business, that is a good source of inspirations to start from. And then, like, instead of us going to workshop rooms and starting to be visionary by ourselves, we choose to go to the customers directly. So we selected a handful of strategic customers and invited them into a co-innovation process, meaning that let's figure this out together. Instead of us just trying to push something new, let's figure out this together, as this is like a dual win for us. And then as it started to take shape, we could start to like reverse engineer back to the capabilities that, okay, now we know the use cases, who are the ones using this and for what. Now we have some blueprints of what do we actually need to capture and how to deliver that to the customer and those specified user groups. Which brings us to, do we dare to say, recommendation? Like, as I mentioned there, like when you are entering to an unknown area, of course you need to have a bit of visionary thoughts yourself in order to be able to drive the work. But instead of just trying to be innovative on your own and come up visionary solutions for your customers, we encourage to, based on the learnings that we've been working in a wide front with Solita in different contexts, is that working close with your own customers is way faster way in terms of also needs for investments and also routes to ROI, like returns from investments, as there is actual need, identified need to be fulfilled. So in this equation, we added the final attribute to the data side, that what is the enabled customer use case value, not just the use case. Use cases are easy to find, but what are the use cases that have high enough value that makes it worthy to investigate any further and invest to developing capabilities for it.
What's customer use case value? What does that mean?
For example, the LCA, the life cycle assessment calculations could be one. So construction companies are, if I understood right, are partly required to use third-party members to do those calculations that they are like can be trusted on, the calculations. And then the data is all here and there.
Okay.
So in that case, maybe if that data asset, if the needed data assets would be usable and provided to the customer as an asset, the value upside for the customer then would be less time needing to use manual work, your own employees figuring out that what does this mean and how do we fill the holes in the data and how do we provide it and where is this coming from and so forth, so forth. So less time spent on manual work and improved time to do the actual output that is expected from the LCA. That could be a use case that has potentially high enough value in it for companies to invest to it.
Okay. So to condense, customer use case is a tangible business benefit.
Exactly, yeah.
All right.
And in this, like, maybe you noticed that we get rid of, took away the embodied carbon part here, that this is true beyond green. In a way, the evidence that we were referring to, that is a product information. It's an attribute of a product that you just need to have it packed by data that it's actually green. But these kind of like opportunities with product information also lies within as-is operations and within existing operations and products.
Really? Should we share?
I'm surprised that we have something in store for the next.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, Mikko, do you want to share some stories about it?
I'll try. Let's see how it goes. So we wanted to start with the feeling because as we've been like playing around with different cases and what to share with you today, this was something that one of our industry old-timers were saying that I'm missing hair, but they are still raised by this case that you shared with me. So I was really enjoying the moment that, okay, this is a feeling that when some existing ways are turned into a new angle, even to a radical angle, it feels totally wrong at first. And something that we are seeing forerunning companies doing is experimenting on a topic of product quality data. So really core topic in existing operations and between companies, but in a totally new perspective. So our claim here is that sharing deviations in quality could be an opportunity space for future value creation.
I don't believe it. Not happening.
You've been doing this.
It's happening.
Yeah. So this is quite sensitive internal data, typically, because as is, if your customers know this deviation in quality, typically that situation trigger reclamations or even price cuts, quite heavy price cuts. And that is, of course, something that companies try to stay away as much as possible. But switching the perspective, knowing those deviation could be a source of value for some. So who would that be? So actually it was not a coincidence, it was part of the co-innovation process that we were working with this given company. But we had in the sessions that we were running, our customers, this company's customers and their stakeholders from sourcing, purchasing, sustainability, and also production in those sessions. And the production people started to raise this kind of like related to transparency a bit by surprise that actually, what is your policy in sharing this and this kind of information? And they were referring to product quality aspects. And when you start to consider this kind of reality that as is, no company is providing their customers with faulted products. I think that is a fair assumption. But the reality on the production floor might be different as they actually noticed that, sure, at some cases there might be some slight deviations in the quality if we are talking, for example, some bio-based products such as food or maybe some wood as a construction material or even steel. So there is a deviation and then the production floor people encounter those deviations, and of course they try to mitigate that in the processes by configuring their machineries in the best possible ways. But the problem here, what is ongoing work with this given company is that there are two parties at the moment in the existing relationship between supplier and the OEM customers, like from supplier side, sales and accounts, and from the customer side, sourcing and purchasing. The role and responsibilities of these two parties don't include such exploration that whether we find new value creation opportunities in our collaboration. It was even in a way that the customer purchasing directly said that, yeah, we only expect you to provide with the products that meet our quality criterions. And if that's not possible, then maybe you are not our supplier. And then on the other hand side, like this kind of radical feels wrong at first, the supplier side, own production people were saying that over my dead body will share this information to customers because it will cause a whole lot of problems that we've seen over the course of my career. We don't want that. Don't you dare to go any further with this topic. And again here, it's maybe a repeating pattern here, but the co-innovation is the way to go. Like when you figure out these kind of opportunity areas, you need to also figure out who are the right parties for that exploration. And in this case, again, handful of strategically chosen customers, which this given company could have this kind of shared intent that, okay, we want to explore this topic together and see what comes out of it. And you as a supplier who are experimenting on this quality data as an opportunity, your mission is to truly understand how your customers are using your product and how do they actually operate. And from there, you can start to see how to remove friction with your solution, maybe unlock some totally new aspects from existing practices and status quo. And this is partly why we are not raising any technicalities, why we are not today talking about digital twins or how to use different like data technologies to get the data flowing and whatnot, technical data product and things like that. There are lots of good presentations on that, and do check the crash courses on those topics also. But what we are raising here is that this kind of transparency, not even the radical one, is actually a change in relationship between the companies. And hopefully that previous case example highlighted that it's actually changing your relationship and who are the parties you actually collaborate with. Which then leads us to playing a scenarios, like how could you a bit try to like figure out that what could be the possible futures? Are you still with us also in line? We promised that it will be a crash course and lots of content, so you better bear with us. We have a couple of segments still ongoing.
Yeah, hang in there. For those that finish this course, there will be a special prize.
Yeah.
No, that one. So Mikko said something about scenarios, and this relates all the way back to, I believe, slide number 3 or 4, when we're speaking of companies with investment appetites and then fusion menus. So they need to get something done. They're trying to figure out how to get it done and to what kind of level. What is their ambition or target state? Now, those of you who know me know that I love regulation. No, I don't. But we will use example as, once again, the EUDR, EU deforestation regulation here, as an example because it is very topical right now for a lot of companies operating in the EU and a lot of you folks online today. So this is something that organizations need to get done by the end of this year. If the readiness is not there the 1st of January, there's some really adverse business risks that relate to it. And this is, once again, this is a totally a supply chain transparency related issue. We're helping a number of our customers with EUDR, possibly even the most in Finland regarding our competition. And the things that we see there that are evident is, first of all, that the customers need to level up the quality of, or the level of their transparency regarding supply chain data. They need to ask, figure out, and record a lot of information that wasn't needed until now. Related, for example, to geospatial information at the start. And of course, as Mikko said, there's existing sort of business data infrastructure and operations between the customers, so it is not a barren land that they start building upon. There's existing ways of communicating and transmitting data between your customers. And that is, of course, something that a lot of the customers use already. So whether it's a purchase and supply and order process or product information transmitting, they use existing data and infrastructure on it. But now what is, for example, regarding EUDR, what is evident is that a certain amount of transparency has to be created towards the regulators that be, and then towards the B2B customer. And that is something all the players are doing right now. And then the sort of, when we speak of scenarios, the question is, first of all, what is your horizon? What are you aiming towards? And what is the level of ambition that you work? And I think it's fair to say that, for example, regarding EUDR, majority of companies out there are doing their utmost best to reach the level that is required by the end of the year. That's where their target is. And we also respect that target because to a certain extent it's even an existential threat. But then the question is, what then? What next? Shall we leave this sort of new data value chain as it is, or is it something that can be cultivated, that can be built upon, that can be leveraged? What does it mean for a company to have full chain product transparency for the first time? For me, I think at least that's a very tantalizing idea. And that sort of brings once again the customer and the enabled customer use case value or tangible business benefit and the servitization layer into it. Companies that are trying to figure out, should we actually, you could call it overinvest. That is the green line you're looking at. That is the radical transparency. Should they not only go the extra mile, but actually take 2 laps more? Because they see that these kinds of actions and infrastructure are a good foundation to build upon something. The value, of course, naturally, I'm saying obvious things, but is on the customer side of things. And that means for the companies and for all of you folks who are right now struggling with EUDR or a number of different acronyms given to us by the European Union, what from my perspective or our perspective, I think is a soothing thought is that if you're thinking of creating a competitive advantage by going the extra mile, figuring out new tangible business benefits related to product information, related to operations information, related to supplier information, fear not, you don't have to invent it yourself. Don't go into a room and devise 7 different scenarios and build a budget for them. Go and engage your customers. What do you engage your customers with? Showed the picture earlier about figure out what is it that your customer is buying from you. Once again, start from there. Whether if you're on the commodity side, where your customer is buying from you production capability, logistics, reliability, and low deviation of goods, start from there. Get in the room with the relevant stakeholders at your customer's end and start figuring out, saying that, hey, we're presented this opportunity or this possibility to bring forth, ingest, model, and share new kinds of information related to the product you're using from us or related to our deliveries to you. Start from there and see where that takes us. Once again, if you are doing something radical, it will feel wrong. It will feel a little bit queasy at the bottom of your stomach. There will be a lot of people saying, don't do this. This is madness. Some of them might be right and you'll get fired, but there's always the chance, and we believe the chance is out there. There's a latent demand on the market that when you figure out radical data transparency in your core business models, there is not only market share to gain, but there's actually a market to make.
I love the fact that it's getting you pumped up. I can see
it's getting me pumped up.
Your tone is changing.
Mikko, I'm feeling it. I'm really feeling it today. Now, on this, as we're painting a brilliant new future full of radical transparency, a sobering thought for all of us. Once again, what we asked you at the start, what is your place in the supply chain? What is it that your customers buy from you? And what is your position regarding transparency and what goals you have there? Think of this dichotomy that we're presenting. Saying that we're not the forerunners is not a bad thing. It takes these days a huge amount of work to get your operations and your product to the level of transparency that the market requires. And that is amicable and admirable that you folks invest in it. And that is work that we at Solita have the privilege and pleasure to help our clients with. So that is nothing to frown upon. And then there's the we create new innovation side, the radical transparency end of it. If you have business that is looking at this, we applaud you. Very good. But it is good to make this distinction on it because there's also quite a lot of innovation theater around this. We do hackathons or we do exercises and so forth that creates the illusion that we are a forerunning company. And Solita is no exception in this. I think it's good to have a fair amount of humility. But what is good to understand in terms of the scenario work, what we see in the market as we operate with our clients, is that this kind of work is ongoing. Whatever industry you're in, I can assure you, there are parties that are looking at servitizing and creating tangible business benefits out of production data, out of product data, out of supplier data. This is something that is happening right now. And what we do want to say is whether you are on the status quo, which once again is not a bad thing to do, it is a lot of hard work, or you're on the sort of future-oriented or future-leaning side, this will become a reality in your business sooner or later. And then the question is when your client starts asking you for funny information, for information that has detailed requirements beyond what you can produce right now, or what your supply chain is accustomed to. When that happens, you need to make sure you have something else than a price point as leverage in your offering. Because if that happens, then it's a race to the bottom. So even though we are with Mikko, we're sort of bringing two different binary options in terms of whether you're doing the minimum that is required or whether you're doing the sort of forward-leaning things. You need to have at least one foot through the door when you look into the future to understand that these capabilities you're building must be able to respond to needs that might be on your front door in just a second.
And maybe as a one takeaway, like considering the work that we see are also other colleagues at Solita doing on this front, doing this kind of quick assessment, drawing your company line as is, could be a good exercise.
It is.
Like immediately doing, not yet because we need your concentration in here, but right after this call, that could be a good place to do a first version. What are the key attributes? And then how does your line look like? Yep. And what is the, at the moment, plan where you are headed at? Yep. And maybe then draw lines for a couple of your key competitors, that are actually showing in your customers also.
Yeah. So this is easily horribly expensive when we're thinking of revamping whole supply chains, especially if we go into the OEM side and complex machinery, where there might be 100 or 200, 300 different suppliers and a lot of parts. Leaning into the future, when we speak of data, radicals, or transparency in the supply chains, what can we expect?
True. Easy task to close off.
I always give you the easy question.
Thank you, Topi, for that.
You're welcome.
I embrace it again. So, talking about the supply chains, typically those are, in network-wise, they are quite close networks for a given company. So now what we are seeing is also emergence of ecosystems that include direct competing OEMs sharing the ecosystems due to them acknowledging that their supply chain is full of SME, small and mid-sized enterprises and companies who don't have capabilities for this kind of data transparency or even the data flow across. So how do they then improve the performance of their supply chains if it's a game of lowest nominator in the flow? Something that is interesting and happening led by the EU automakers in Germany. So automotive industry has started this kind of Catena X initiative, which is partly driven from just providing details and in your supply chain and improving the performance of the supply chain, but also partly on an EU level, the EU wanting to have a bit more or a bit less control in our company's operations by the mega scalers or the big technology providers providing all the bells and whistles to run the businesses. So there's also this kind of a bit of open sourcing and having the control within the companies and within the EU is partly one driver behind. But mostly this is from company perspective, the supply chain performance and creating this kind of new radical collaboration across the whole automotive value chain. So if we look at again with this tool, what they try to do with Catena X, they aim to level up the whole value chain. That the lowest nominator is not saying that, okay, this is the level of data flows that we can have within the value chain, but to level up the whole value chain by having companies to join this initiative. And they have already figured out a couple of like driving use cases, which they have quite visionary thoughts to how to servitize and help companies to then start to use these new capabilities and then actually level up the whole value chain. So what are those use cases? Here's one example. So product carbon footprint is everywhere at the moment. How to calculate that, how to get the data for it. Is it actuals, averages, third-party data, what, something. So within automotive industry, they vision an automated product carbon footprint calculations based on the actuals from all the actual components used to build that vehicle. Quite visionary thought and quite massive data set considering how much vehicles are being produced and each of them having individual calculations on actual level.
Yeah.
This will happen most likely, and there are quite cool demos already showing that how this kind of automation could work. There is work to be done, of course, but it will happen in semi-short time frame. What this will also make it happen is that OEMs, but also companies in their upstream, for say tier 1, tier 2 companies, they also will have capabilities to automatically assess the improvements areas of their product carbon footprint down the line. It might be a segment of a vehicle, or it might be an individual component group of the vehicle, which they can see that, okay, this part of our product is a major causer of our CO2 footprint, and thus this is an area where we seek how to decrease it. And doing that automatically. And even beyond, which I think starts to be on a quite radical end of things, that they are also introducing ways to grade the data or rate the data used in those PCF calculations. So primary data share refers to, is it actually actuals from the company's own data, or is it just averages or third-party data outside the company? So that will become transparent, that what kind of data are you using in communicating your PCF. And also there will be different perspectives how to give a quality rating for that data. So it goes quite details, in a way, metadata behind the PCF. So who will be the preferred companies? The ones claiming that they have low carbon footprint, but without evidence, or low primary data share and low quality rating, or the ones having a bit higher product carbon footprint, but on a solid ground in terms of primary data, the actuals, and high quality rating. It's not an easy answer, but a good question.
And I think once again, it's good to say that this is not, in essence, this is not an ESG or CO2 issue.
Yeah.
This is product information. This is production information. This is supplier information. That just happens to have a facet of PCFs or CO2s. But for you to have detailed product carbon footprint, you need to detail in a very high amount of detail to be able to describe your product.
And this was also like just, what are your capabilities? The dear participants to this crash course, like, what are your capabilities in here? That's why we raised play the scenarios to the end and see the consequences of your decisions, because these kind of things are happening across the industries, and automotive being maybe a driver, a forerunner.
I like it.
Yeah, on their own. For sure, this will be a source of inspiration for other industries too. So we've been talking a bit about transparency and radical transparency. Maybe a quick recap before we have start to cool down a bit and
simmer down now.
Yes.
Yeah. So just very shortly, to recap, we haven't been talking a bit, we've been talking a lot about transparency and radical transparency. Just to sort of, once again, put these in some kinds of two categories. So this is this is how we like to frame it on our end. And especially if you're looking at sort of creating radical transparency, we urge you to at least that you're ticking some of the boxes on these slides. Whether you're working with transparency issues or want to create radical new business innovations, luckily we at Solita are happy to help. And regarding that, Mikko, we have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah.
Could you bring some relief to our listeners?
Again,
so all of this is super
resting on my shoulders.
On your shoulders.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So
I'll try to do my best.
How do we go forward from this?
Yeah. So I think you are able to recognize from the elements that we are raising here, from our approach, how we at Solita approach these topics, considering the cases and the stories that we shared. So these are the building blocks, not all, but maybe the key ones relevant for this crash course, how we do this, how our colleagues do it, and how we've been like establishing this kind of Solita approach, working with different companies on the topic. So business model is in the center. We won't go into the details of it, but that of course is in the core. But something from the value chain perspective, it takes me by surprise quite often that companies are not that well defining what is their value chains. And that is not typically shared knowledge within the company, even though it makes especially these supply chain topics and this data flow across the whole end-to-end value streams super easier to work with when you can point with your finger that now the data is coming from our supplier, and in our operation in this phase we need to do this and this and this in order for us to deliver it to our customers. Yeah. So I think this is something super trivial to start with, that make it so that you can talk with your colleagues by pointing a finger to the picture, that from here to there and here we have challenges, and to there to enable this and this and that. The other parts then are the data models part here. Something that we have started to quite actively use is conceptual data models. This has many different names, but let's just stick with the conceptual data models. How IT is defining operative data models is not a human language often, due to it being a language for computers. And thus it makes it super hard to start working with cross-functional teams on the topic, because 9 out of 10 people in the room don't understand the vocabulary and the terms used in those data models. Yeah. So that's something, some learnings that we can share, that from taking the, for example, regulatory information requirements as a layman's terms and creating this kind of conceptual data model. What information is connected to what information? How does the big picture look like? Makes it so much easier to work on this topic with your P&L people, with your IT and data people, with your regulation people, and with your process people. So that's also something. I think I skipped the customer part because I think we were already highlighting that for a couple of times, and I think that is a good one. Yeah. And then, please.
I think, sorry to interrupt you, sir, but I think on the value chain or supply chain visualization point of view, I actually disagree with you a little.
Yes. Go ahead.
Well, actually, quite a lot. What we see is that companies actually have end-to-end supply chain visualizations as they are, but that relates a lot to the data models. So they are end-to-end visualizations from, let's say, a sourcing perspective, or purchasing perspective, or then from the business side of it.
Yes.
And it is something that is easy to understand within the function that has used it to figure out their own operations. But once you take it out of that box and show it somewhere else, it loses a lot of abilities to communicate what it is trying to do. So especially in our work with EUDR, with our customers, that we've been privileged to work on for the past 6 months, is that it is, when we're doing end-to-end value chains, it is actually bringing together these different streams of pictures that exist or do not exist, and you have to create overlays on top of it. You have to be able to create documents and shared views that are understandable by hopefully as many parties as possible. That is when we speak of end-to-end chains, that is what we mean.
So just to conclude, these could be your next like individual starting points, like where you could start, or this could be your whole runway how to like start to approach the topic. But of course, different companies are in different phases. But these were something that we used to over in our case examples and how we were raising the topics, and wanted to just close this crash course by once more giving this as a like more maybe hands-on suggestions that based on our learnings, these are good starting points or next steps if you are feeling that we haven't yet done that part. And if those deliverables that are mentioned there are something that raises your questions, it's time to move to the questions. And of course, like after the crash course, please keep do ask questions, and let's continue offline.
Yes. Whenever I'm present here speaking, I like to end with this quote by John F. Kennedy. It's sometimes a little weird when we're at the dinner table, but you know, you got to do what you got to do. As we started today with the theme saying that this is complex, and that's not something we can escape from. But we also believe there are tools how to remove this complexity. And third and fourth and foremost is this has to be done. When we are speaking of supply chain transparency, we believe this is an existential question for us as a people. And this is not a and or, this is a binary yes no. And this is the only option we have. And I think that is good to keep in mind, as we will be having the funny feelings in the bottom of our stomach and fighting the battles that have to be fought for transparency and radical transparency to take place. We thank you for your time today. Look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I was actually checking online. Is there already some questions? So people in joining us remotely, if you have anything on your mind, do ask them now, or then directly afterwards, so we can respond to those. But there's one. I think this is quite cool. Who should have the ownership in this in the organization? Whose responsibility is to lead this? I think this is quite a good question and hard to answer in simple and straightforward way. But anything that you'd like to share? I have a couple of thoughts.
Well, I think one of the answers is already in the question. So someone has to lead it.
Yeah.
And take ownership of it. And that's not always a given, especially when we speak of sort of what I think, Mikko, you'll be going to is sort of cross-functional work, but it's something that someone has to take leadership and ownership of.
Yeah.
What do you think, Mikko? Who should that be, or how should that be done?
So maybe just to say this bluntly, that if it's a single function-led initiative, I think that is not worth continuing. So this work shouldn't be just given to one function and then expecting them to solve this for everyone. It doesn't happen. So this is cross-functional by nature. So the lead can be taken. Someone needs to lead that it maintains alignment and focus. It can be if you have like business-minded IT, and the technical capabilities is something that you are lacking greatly, then it might make sense to have maybe first phase is in the driver's seat, someone from IT who is working closely with business. But the initiative itself needs to have also the PLL people and then the related product category people within it. So it is a cross-functional by nature. And of course, not forgetting the regulation folks. And then when the initial pre-studies or that kind of phases are done, the ownership should be in business, because as we've been raising, there are opportunities to capitalize this, or if you do bad decisions, it directly impacts your business, even in a way that you are restricted from access to the markets. So in that sense, there should be a strong ownership from the business side.
All right.
That's my short answer.
It wasn't short. But that was an answer. Thank you, Mikko. Any other questions, or you can also comment, think out loud. Is there some? Sir.
Well, I'm thinking of how to actually gather the data, where to store it, and how to distribute it. Have you thought of any ideas like embedding some API in the supply chain networks, or OpenAI? Not OpenAI. Oh, no. OpenAI API, and or blockchain trust networks or something like this.
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, I think that all those are experimented by different companies, and they are already like for digital product passports, you can see that within EU there are a couple of newly established companies who are providing that as a service. Some might have a blockchain technology behind it, that it's the data has a different nature by it, and then others are providing you the capabilities to take it from your source systems and provide it with APIs. I think that comes down to the working with your customers, that what are they capable of digesting.
And your suppliers. Because
of course,
if you create, to digress a little bit, Mikko, from you said, if you create sort of API capabilities to sort of have low friction methods of taking data from your suppliers, if your suppliers don't have that data, an API is not really the right pill to solve that aim. So in terms of working with your customers and working with your suppliers, I think a good starting point, the sort of first iteration, might just be an Excel sheet and say, in what form can you provide the data you have? How often and in what quality? Excel sheet is data. It is nothing to be frowned upon. And when you start seeing your customers having the ability to create this data in a uniform fashion, and especially with a frequency that would entail having APIs, then it's something I would look at investing in. If they're providing that data once a year, an email is good. If it is something that should be once a day, and then APIs are probably the right tool of choice.
Maybe a final comment. Good source for inspiration for that is, for example, textile industry is experimenting this. They are calling it both digital product passports, but also digital IDs. So they are attaching QR codes to the individual clothing, and then via that QR code you can see to a certain extent the sourcing and the used raw materials and whatnot. Maybe on B2B side, it's more the question that do they follow the QR code type of approach, that it's actually attached to the product and you can read it from there? Or is it more relevant for them to provide directly with their end customer and access to the information? But the textile industry, there are like public examples that you can like see and draw a bit of inspiration, and then the digital product passport suppliers already that provide this solution as a service.
Excellent
Anything
question.
else?
Anything else online or in this room? I see there's a sir.
Thank you. It was really interesting to hear. And might just comment. I think that it could be only regulated by the governments or some legal organizations, because it looks like it goes against of the marketing and against of the business interests. When you're being more transparent, that means you're more greener. That it means your products is expensive, and it's against of your marketing, and you cannot compete with other not so open companies, for example. And I think it could be regulated only by government. If you have to be open, you will be open, and all of them will be open.
Yeah. So I think your comment carries a lot of merit. Being green and being transparent about it doesn't automatically mean that you have a good business. That is the sentiment, the reality of the market. Markets have different time spans and horizons they look at. Then there are specific sectors where there is a premium on the market that is most commonly regulation driven. The European Union for a long time, they spoke softly and carried a big stick. As an ex-US president used to, not John F. Kennedy, but another one. I love US presidents. But what we see these days is that speaking softly just doesn't do it. So now EU is waving the big stick. And I think this is the reality that companies are now adjusting to. Yeah.
Looking at the time, I think we need to step down from the stage and from the limelight and close the crash course from this part.
Yes, it's been an honor and a privilege to talk to you folks today. Mikko, it's always fun to talk with you.
Same to you.
Dear listeners, as you close this stream today and get on with whatever you have next, a couple of things. So we will be following up via different channels for our viewers today. You will be getting access to the material you've seen and also a chance to get the recording. So you can go home and show your kids. Now listen to what Mikko and Topi said. So those are some of the assets that will become available for you.
If there's no picture, I don't believe it. So if someone does that, I want to have a picture from that.
Yeah, exactly.
Please do that.
Yes. Be in contact with us. And on the term of being in contact with us, if you heard something today that resonates with you, we, as Mikko showed at the start, we as Solita, we operate in a lot of countries. We have people there wanting to help you guide yourself along this journey, and we're here for your help and your benefit. So do be in contact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hope you have a good day.